Well, again, welcome everybody. Today we are going to be talking about what to expect during a sales and use tax audit. As Steve had said, my name is Philip Johnson, and I am a tax research specialist, and I do specialize in sales tax. So, all right, let's get started. So how do you prepare for a sales tax audit? Does the thought of a sales tax audit keep you up at night? Well, you're not alone if it does. Business owners and tax pros are often worried that they won't be prepared when the state auditor calls. No need to feel defenseless or tense about audits. An audit ensures tax is collected and paid and remitted. Tax is collected, paid, or remitted. On past sales or purchases. And education. Yes, we really are about education and customer service. So we'll be going over things that will really make it easier for you to be prepared for an audit. Most of it has to do with good record keeping. So first step is you'll be contacted by an auditor either by letter or by phone. You'll be interviewed to get familiarize yourself with the business and the industry that you're in, and to discuss your taxpayer rights. Now let's get started preparing for the audit. So preparing for an audit, an important part is developing a good working relationship with the auditor. This will make the process go much smoother. Also, electronic records are, if you can supply those, it makes it easier for the auditor to identify areas of interest and remove those areas that they really do not need to be looking at or don't want to look at with, if it doesn't have anything to do with the audit, there's no reason to start there. And also in preparation, have your records available for the auditor. Create a comfortable workstation for the auditor that would allow them to easily access the records, also the ability to ask you questions. And then, of course, as the taxpayer, it's always best to ask lots of questions if you're not sure. And again, your auditor will have discussed or provided information about your taxpayer's rights. So understand you do have rights as a taxpayer. Available is a form that we have, publication of On Idaho Taxpayer Rights, and also an audit, your rights and responsibilities. So you have certain rights, but you also have certain responsibilities during an audit. So how far back can an audit go? If you have a valid seller's permit, the audit period will generally be the most recent 36 months or 3 years of business. If tax was collected but not remitted, the audit could be carried back to the opening of the business or the permit. If you're unpermitted, the audit period could be 7 years. In preparation for the audit, the first thing to do is to identify the audit period and then check the statute of limitations. You may be asked to sign a waiver of limitations at the start of the audit period. This is an agreement between you and the auditor that sets a specific audit period for review. This allows additional time for you and the auditor to gather and review records, lock the period in so many audits are not required to keep months from falling out of statute, time to understand the audit procedures, and importantly, to discuss any issues before the audit is final. Here is the top portion of the waiver of limitations page. It allows you to select which permits are allowed to be reviewed. Auditors will generally review most of the following. Make sure that all the records, requested records, as well as other anticipated records are available for the specific audit period. Auditors are in the field of reviewing facts. So if there are records that are missing, if you have holes in those records or something is not available, that could result in a possible additional tax liability. So it's important that if you have records missing, that you try to track those down. All right. Questions. Now it's time for a little quiz. And so the first one is, what type of relationship should you develop with your auditor? Do we have any takers on that answer? Well, if we don't, a good one. That's the type of relationship you'd like to keep with your auditor. Why are electronic records a good option? Oh, thank you, Ian. Good working relationship. I appreciate that. So, how long? Let's see. Why are records a good option?
Looks like Michelle answered.
Okay, I haven't seen it.
For easy transfer.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. And a way to identify areas of interest. That's very good. How long is an audit for permitted taxpayer?
Michelle again with 36 months.
Okay, that's correct.
Somebody's paying attention.
Yeah. And what's the waiver limitations? That one might not be as easy to answer in a short answer, but it's basically to lock the audit period in, which gives you time to gather and review records. All right. Thank you for that. All right. Sales tax on sales. Again, electronic files will help identify taxed sales and non-tax sales. An auditor will examine all taxable and non-taxable sales, also verify that taxes collected and remitted to the state, and will review documentation for untaxed sales. That would include any sales tax exemption certificates, which should be kept on file at all times, since in Idaho they do not expire. The other items they would look for is any shipping going out of state and having shipping manifests showing that in fact it was shipped and not picked up. Sales reconciliations. You should report all sales to the tax commission. That includes taxable and non-taxable, to ensure taxes reported to the tax commission and the Internal Revenue Service are reasonable. Gross sales are reconciled for any inconsistencies, and higher sales reported on the IRS tax return than the sales and use tax return. The assumption is that sales may have been underreported. Unless the sales are reported by a marketplace facilitator. Yes, thank you, Crystal. I appreciate that additional information. Taxable, by the way, Crystal is one of our sales tax managers, so I'm glad she's on the panel. Taxable versus exempt sales. Many taxpayers run into trouble in an audit because they did not keep the appropriate documentation to substantiate their taxable and exempt sales. Exemption certificates should be filled out accurately and available for review. Understand that all sales are presumed taxable unless there's proof to the contrary.
So John has a question. It says, what about a child who sells lemonade every Saturday?
That every Saturday? I think that we'd probably still consider a child selling lemonade as a occasional sale, and I don't think that would be something that we would usually worry about.
Is there a threshold to the amount of sales?
Let me get Crystal. I unmuted you if you want to talk to that, or Kim. Kim, I unmuted you as well.
The way our law is written is that if you make more than 2 sales in a 12-month period, it is considered a retailer and you are supposed to collect sales tax.
Correct. Thank you for that clarification. All right. Yeah, those occasional sales and then going into more sales on a weekly basis through a summer can be something that is difficult for children or a family to take care of. But on our website, we do have the opportunity for a temporary seller's permit, and that would alleviate some of those issues, and they would be able to have a temporary seller's permit to run probably through the summer, because they are valid for 90 days, and they can report their sales that way and the tax collected. All right. All right, use tax. This can be one of the the area of audit risk due to errors in an audit when they're looking at it. If you're buying for resale, wholesaling, producing items, or have a statutory exemption, you may buy your products exempt from sales tax by using Form ST-101, resale or exemption certificate, or contractors would use the ST-103 exemption certificate for real property contractors. You may also receive these from your customers, which is the ones we were referring to for your exempt sales. And you are not required to collect tax from them if the purchaser using the exemption certificate fills it out properly. It is their responsibility, the purchaser, as a matter of law. If you haven't paid sales tax on these goods, any of the goods that you have purchased, you would owe use tax unless the items are held or exempt. All right. Fixed assets. Fixed assets will be reviewed. They usually involve large purchases of equipment or other assets. And they are typically from depreciation schedules, income tax credits, and or a detailed balance sheet. You should be in the habit of reviewing capital assets regularly to ensure tax was paid or use tax was remitted. Expenses and purchases. Verify that sales tax is properly paid to the vendors. This may include items that were originally bought for an exempt purpose, like for resale, and then put into a taxable use. When a taxpayer has a large volume of purchases, the auditor typically will request a chart of accounts and ask for detailed transactions recorded on those specific accounts and review them for accuracy. That also allows them to remove any purchases or expenses that do not have a sales and use tax consequence. So as a good rule of thumb, purchases that are not taxed will be reviewed and verification of tax due or exemption will be asked for. This is also if you have a category of an expense like store supplies, items that you're going to be using in the business, if you have missing invoices, they will be held taxable. All right, in concluding the audit, after reviewing all documentation, the auditor will explain the adjustments to you or your representative, give you an opportunity to give explanations or find the invoice or sales exemption certificate if they have one available. And then if you agree with the adjustments and you'll have an opportunity to prepay all or a portion of the deficiency once the audit has been completed, and then that will keep interest from continuing to accrue on the paid portion. If you cannot come up with an agreement, you have an option of paying for the parts that you do agree with, and anything you don't agree with, you have 63 days from the date the audit is issued and a chance to protest the results. And then during the presentation of the final audit, you'll have information on how to protest the audit determination. All right, do we have any additional questions?
I don't see any right now. They might be typing though.
Yep. I think the most important thing about the sales and use tax audit is just keeping good records, have your records readily available, and the use of electronic records definitely makes an audit go by smoother and faster.
So yeah, they don't have to have paper records of everything, right?
Not necessarily, no. In some cases, some companies actually scan some or all of their invoices, and those are accepted, yes.
Yeah. I think sometimes when we're talking about records, particularly in some of the other webinars I do, people have this idea that they need to have all of these filing cabinets full of paper.
I think that's the advantage of having computers, is the filing cabinets can be in a small box within the computer. Yeah.
As long as you have a good organizational skills, then yeah, that works great.
Yes.
Well, I don't see any other questions. I hope this was helpful. Everybody's pretty quiet, so. Alrighty. Well, what I'll do is I will leave the room open for probably the next 5 minutes or so. So you have a chance. If you have any questions, I literally sit right next to Philip. So if you have any questions and he's not here, I can go ahead and get him over to him and he can reply back. Also, the handout materials. Yeah, I mean, there's only 10 of us. Let me go through. We'll just do a little discussion. Usually I don't like to unmute everybody if there's like 30 people in here. It gets a little... But let's go ahead and do this. It's the Wild West now. Everybody's unmuted.
So I will ask a question. This is John McGowan, and historically, a lot of people would order presents for Christmas, and the Idaho's use tax did not extend as broadly as it does now as far as sellers being obligated to collect the sales tax or use tax. But I dare say for those situations where there's no collection of sales or use tax, you know, when you order a Christmas present online, your non-compliance rate is probably 95%. Would anybody disagree with that?
I would have to leave that up to Kim or Crystal to even comment on that.
This is Kim Wynn, the Audit Division Administrator. Hi, everyone. I put my email out there, too, for questions. We don't have that percentage, John, right now of the compliance of when you order online and you're supposed to self-report on your income tax return, or if you've done it for a business, that's different. But we don't have that percentage of compliance right now today.
Just my observation, I've made the suggestion to our Idaho legislature that it would be great to have a $500 exemption, because, you know, when you file your Idaho Form 40, there's a line there about did you report your use tax, and I just hate to see so many people literally non-compliant even though the dollars are so small. So anyway, that was my suggestion, is to have a $500 exemption on use tax, and I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, John, for your comments.
Anybody else? You're very shy today.
Sure. Go ahead and just introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a second and introduce myself. My name is Robert Foster. I'm the Bureau Chief of Sales Tax Audit. And I just wanted to emphasize a little bit about what Philip has already touched on regarding customer service. We really do emphasize here that, you know, anytime we conduct an audit, it's an opportunity to educate the taxpayer. And you can expect that audit staff are communicating regularly and fulfilling their commitments to you. So I just wanted to take a second and introduce myself and let you know that we really are committed to that customer service side anytime we conduct an audit. And I can be reached at robert.foster@tax.idaho.gov if you ever have any questions or concerns for me. I'm happy to get those at any time. Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming to the webinar.
Thank you, Robert.
And this is John McGann again. I'm just going to check out, so thank you for the webinar.
All right. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
All right, I'm going to do another 30 seconds of uncomfortable silence, and then we're going to call it.
You can sing a Christmas carol.
Okay, so Michelle has a question. Michelle, where it says send to, I think you have it selected as host right now. So it's just me is the only person who's seeing them. So if you select all participants and everybody can see it, or everyone. It says she has a quick clarification for use tax. Do you want me to unmute you, Michelle? Oh, she got it. Somebody did.
Oh, gosh.
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
All right. Sorry. I was in a spot where I couldn't talk, but now I am. Just a quick question, clarification on use tax. If the way I understand it, if we pay tax on an item that we are going to use for another product, and that, you know, there's multiple goods to go into this product, but as long as we pay tax on everything that comes together for that product, and then we resell that product, we don't have to collect or pay tax on that, on the sale of that final product. Is that correct?
Are you talking about something that you're doing in the production process?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're purchasing items for the production process, you would purchase those tax exempt, and then tax would be charged to your customer for the full value of that item, which would include your cost of the materials, labor, or whatever else, the profit that you put into that product. That's what would be charged, would be sales tax to your customer. You would actually be able to purchase the materials tax exempt that goes into production.
Okay, but if understood, but in situations where we purchase something, pay tax, and just do it that way, we're technically still okay because we've already paid tax on that. Is that correct? It doesn't happen all the time, but on a few off scenarios.
If you ended up collecting tax on the full value, you could request a adjustment on your sales and use tax return on line 7. You would just need to send in the documentation showing that here's where your sale was, where's the purchase with the sales tax, and that would reduce the amount of tax you'd remit to the tax commission.
Okay, so we don't collect, so not collecting it from the customer, I would just prove that I've already paid sales tax on the 2 items that I put together to sell that customer. Does that make sense?
Well, only if you're actually selling it for the same price. If you're putting a profit onto it, then you have an amount of addition that you would actually need to collect. So you need to collect it from your customer.
Okay, so in a scenario where there's no profit, which that actually is a situation sometimes where there is no profit on it, it's just a service we provide, you know, whatever. Again, off scenarios. Service we provide, we buy the product, we pay the tax, we take care of it for the customer, no profit, just a service, then we don't have to collect tax on them because we're still good, I guess. Compliant. Yes or no?
Crystal, would you comment on that one, on how that would be looked at?
Am I still muted?
Nope, you're good.
Nope.
I'm
You're
good.
good.
Okay. You, as a retailer, you're required to collect sales tax from your customer. So even if you purchased something for $10 and sold it for $10, you would still have to show that 60-cent tax on your customer's invoice. And then you would also apply for basically a refund of the tax that you had paid to your vendor that was paid in error.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's why we ask that if you're buying something for resale, you buy it exempt from tax, and then you collect the tax from the customer, even if there's no markup.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
Thank you,
You
Crystal.
still got to go through the hoops instead of just paying it and making sure the tax is paid. You still got to go through the hoops of either asking for a refund or going through the exemption process and charging the customer and reporting it and all that. Okay.
Right.
Thank you for clarifying.
The buyer has to know they paid the tax. So if there's no invoice, if there's no tax on their invoice, they don't know they paid it.
And during an audit,
If I don't collect it on their item, and not pay it on their item, I just paid it to the vendors that I did in this, like, again, off situation. So, but that makes sense what you're saying.
You could run into a problem if you go through an audit and we're reviewing your tax exempt invoices. It would show you were selling tangible personal property and no tax was charged. We would look at whether or not we needed to charge that tax, and if you couldn't identify that exact expense where you had actually purchased it, you could end up being charged with the tax. So it would be you'd have to show, okay, this is why this was tax exempt, and technically, not technically, as a retailer, you do have to charge tax on tangible personal property being sold to your customers.
Okay, so I just thought of another little element, and again, it's just happening in a couple of off situations here. If I'm selling to a tax exempt customer, a government or a city agency or a nonprofit or whatever it is, and they have documentation of being tax exempt, so they're tax exempt. So I don't collect tax from them.
Correct.
But okay, so I'm not collecting tax from them, and then I've paid. If I pay the tax to my vendor, if I buy it from them rather than telling them, hey, I'm buying it tax exempt from them, I pay tax to them, create this item, and then sell it to a tax exempt customer. You would
want to either do an adjustment on that sale, the 850 that you're filing, either online or manually, or we have on our website a TCR, which is a tax credit refund report that you can fill out and request the same type of refund. And you would have all the documents that would show we sold it to this tax-exempt entity, here's their ST-101, and here's the invoice that we paid tax on, and then you'd be issued a refund.
This is Kim. This is Kim Wayne. To help you out, each business is different, but if you're in the business of resale, then that's the exemption to not pay the tax then, and it goes to your customer when it's actually sold, because there are probably, if you're buying bulk or things paying tax one way during an audit, then yeah, we need to break down, you know, where it went. So if you're in the business of resale, then you don't pay tax to your vendor. It should go to your customer, the end user, to help you out. Now, if you use it for, and that was a slide, if you do use it, then yeah, then you need to pay tax at the time that you guys personally used it because you didn't pay tax to your vendor.
Paying tax on one end or the other. You have to pay tax on one end or the other, but now what you're explaining to me is how to just ask for a refund of where I pay it if the customer is tax exempt and going through the correct documentation of it.
Yes, but you also, as Kim was pointing out, you should be, if you're in the business of resale, you should be purchasing all those items from that particular vendor tax exempt. And then what her point was is that if you use one of those items in your business instead of selling it, that's where use tax would be applied.
Okay. That TCR also.
TCR. Say that again, Kim.
The application for a refund.
Oh, yes.
As part of that refund process, the law requires you to go back and ask your vendor for a refund first. So there's a lot of reasons that it's just, as a retailer, it would behoove you to buy the items exempt from tax and then collect tax from your customer. Because you will have to go, you can submit the TCR, but we'll ask you to go back to the vendor, request a refund. If they won't give you a refund, then we will.
Gotcha. Well, and again, it was only a couple of off scenarios to just help a customer out, not help a customer out, but you know, just in the whole package of everything that I do. And so I wanted to make sure that I understood before I went too deep down the rabbit hole offering that, you know, because like you said, it was a one-off thing. Because all my other vendors, I do tax exempt. It was just a couple of one-offs. So that answered my question right there too. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
These are great discussions, by the way.
And nobody's up for singing Christmas carols.
Start us off.
All right. Well, if nobody has any questions, I think we can probably call this for now.
You guys have a great day.
Yeah. Everybody have a great holiday. Thanks for attending. And thanks, Philip. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, Kim and Crystal and Robert. Appreciate it.
Thanks.